What the world thinks they know about Pont-Saint-Esprit in August of '51 is a goddamn fairy tale. The official reports call it mass ergot poisoning, contaminated rye bread making folks see things, making them convulse, driving them to leap from windows. 500 people affected, they say. Just a tragic accident, they say. The papers bought it. The doctors bought it. Hell, I almost bought it myself when they first briefed me. But what I witnessed there, what I helped cover up, God help me. I'm recording this knowing full well that the truth is worse than death. At 72, I don't have much time left anyway. Cancer's eating me up inside. Fitting, considering what I've carried all these years. Back in 1951, I was fresh from the Berlin airlift operations. The brass noticed my knack for quieting situations, keeping panic from spreading when those Soviet bastards tried starving West Berlin. August 20th, I got pulled into a room with men who never introduced themselves. They said they needed someone who could make problems disappear before they reached the papers. Someone with my particular talents. 24 hours later, I was on a military transport to France. I had no idea I was being sent to face something that had no business existing in our world. The official record, as documented by the French authorities and subsequently corroborated by American intelligence, maintains that the incident at Pont-Saint-Esprit in August of 1951 was merely a case of mass ergot poisoning, a mundane explanation for what befell some 500 souls in that ancient village. Those afflicted exhibited symptoms most peculiar, violent convulsions, grotesque visions, and a madness so profound that some hurled themselves from windows to escape the horrors that only they could perceive, all attributed to contaminated rye in the baker's bread by those who dared not contemplate more sinister origins.
Shopping make you laugh.
There exist, beyond the feeble conceptualization of human ethics, realms where good and evil are but childish constructs, primitive attempts to impose order upon a cosmos that thrives on madness and chaos. What we encountered in that village, what I bear witness to now, it belonged to such a realm. Evil? No. To call it evil would be to dignify it with human meaning. This was something far more disciplined in its chaos, methodical in its madness. When you've stared into an abyss that stares back, with 1,000 eyes that shouldn't exist, when you've heard sounds that restructure your very ability to perceive reality, you understand that our moral frameworks are but flimsy shelters against the hurricane of cosmic indifference. The cultists who summoned this entity believed they were reaching for power, but they were merely offering themselves as vessels to something that regards human consciousness as we might regard the momentary patterns in spilled coffee. I'd been paired with a French intelligence officer. Dumont was his name. They had us wearing these bulky MSA all-service masks and rubberized protective suits. Cutting-edge gear for '51, but more for show than function, I suspect now. We spent 3 days investigating the contaminated areas that the French military had already secured, taking samples of bread, questioning bakers who'd been screened and prepped before we arrived. The whole charade stank worse than the village morgue. By the fourth day, I'd had enough of their misdirection. If you wanted someone to catalog bread mold, I told Dumont, you could have sent a lab technician. Put me on the next flight to Washington so I can personally inform my superiors how the French are keeping secrets from the very allies who ensured they still have a country called France. Bold words from a man who understood nothing. Dumont just stared at me through that mask for the longest time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. We are not concealing truth to protect France, Colonel Weaver. We are protecting you from truth that no man should bear. He removed his mask then, first time in 4 days, revealing a face haunted by something far worse than mere fatigue.
Mais puisque tu insistes pour voir, alors voir, tu verras. Souviens-toi, lorsque les cauchemars viendront, que j'ai tenté de t'épargner ce fardeau. If you insist on seeing, then see you shall. Remember, when the nightmares come, that I tried to spare you this burden.
My arrogance was met first with stupendous humility, then with consuming regret. To this day, I curse myself for not boarding that plane when I had the chance. Some knowledge, some sights, they burrow into your mind like parasites, feeding on your sanity, until nothing remains but the terrible understanding that we are not alone in this universe, and that which accompanies us is beyond indifferent to our existence. Dumont led me deeper into the compound, past areas even the military personnel avoided. We arrived at what had once been a French military training hall, repurposed into something far more sinister. The guards at the entrance wore not just protective gear, but religious symbols from a half-dozen faiths pinned to their uniforms. Later, I learned this wasn't military protocol. The men had added these talismans of their own desperate accord. "Prepare yourself," Dumont whispered, his voice hollow with resignation. "What lies beyond cannot be unseen." The massive steel doors parted with a pneumatic hiss that seemed to carry within it the faintest echo of distant screams. The stench hit me first, a nauseating fusion of formaldehyde, wet soil, and something else, something primordial and rotten, like the breath of ancient swamps exhaled into modernity. Inside, under harsh military floodlights, was a tableau that shattered my understanding of biological possibility. The French had transformed the cavernous barrack hall into an improvised containment zone, sealing all exits save for a single observation platform where we now stood, looking down upon a scene from some medieval painting of hell. They had been human once. That much I could discern from the occasional recognizable feature. An eye here, a hand there, fragments of humanity drowning in a sea of aberration. But they were human no longer. Their bodies had become fungal temples to something utterly alien, their flesh erupting into pulpy, iridescent masses that pulsated with unnatural life. Crimson tendrils stretched between victims, creating a grotesque living network that pulsed with synchronous rhythm. Skeletal figures stood among bloated, pustule-covered forms, their bodies elongated and twisted into impossible configurations. From one creature, fruiting bodies erupted from what had been shoulders, unfurling like obscene umbrellas. Another bore cancerous growths arranged with terrible symmetry, forming patterns that my eyes refused to fully process, as if my mind itself was protecting me from some dangerous geometry. Most horrifying was their synchronicity. Over 200 of these things, each uniquely transformed, yet moving with collective purpose. Their misshapen mouths opened and closed in perfect unison, not speaking but chanting, a two-part invocation that seemed to distort the very air with its utterance. Shub, a wet, guttural exhalation from multiple throats. Nigurath, a higher, keening response like wind through dead branches, the name repeated endlessly, a metronome of madness that penetrated not just my ears, but my very consciousness. I felt something ancient and patient taking notice of me through the utterance of that name, a vast awareness turning its attention toward my insignificant existence. They have been like this for days, Dumont explained, his clinical tone betrayed by trembling hands. No food, no water, no sleep, just this endless chant. We tried separating them, but proximity is irrelevant. They remain in perfect synchronization regardless of distance. As if sensing our discussion, every malformed head turned toward us simultaneously. Hundreds of eyes, some human, some decidedly not, fixed upon me with terrible recognition. The chanting stopped, replaced by sudden, suffocating silence. Then, as one, they spoke directly to me.
The messenger has come. 20 of 20. The Dark Mother. The Dark Harvest.
The messenger has come. Their voices merged into a single harmonious abomination of sound. After a moment's terrible pause, they continued in unison. 20 of 20, Dark Mother and the Dark Harvest. Dumont grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "Do not respond," he hissed. "Do not engage."
Shopping make you laugh.
But it was already too late. Something had passed between me and those things. A transmission, a contamination, a covenant. Knowledge wrapped around my consciousness like barbed wire, tightening with each beat of my heart. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I'd become part of something vast and terrible. Not just a witness, but a participant in cosmic machinations beyond human comprehension. As they spoke this prophecy, a cataclysmic transformation swept through the hall below us. Dumont and I stood rigid on the observation mezzanine, our hands gripping the metal railing as we gazed down upon the circular chamber beneath. In a single, synchronized moment, as if orchestrated by some unseen conductor, each aberration erupted into a miasma of spores, the sickly bioluminescent cloud illuminating the chamber with an unearthly cyan glow that cast our elongated shadows against the curved wall behind us. From our elevated vantage point, the massive chamber, once perhaps an industrial testing facility or military training arena, had become a writhing sea of biological impossibility. The architecture itself seemed to slowly surrender to the advancing corruption. Metal struts and concrete pillars entwined with glistening crimson sinew and pustulant growths. We both hastily donned our gas masks, fumbling with the straps as the spore cloud billowed upward toward our position. Through the acrid haze, I watched as figures in heavy containment suits moved with practiced precision around the perimeter of the lower level, placing incendiary devices at measured intervals. They worked with the desperate efficiency of men who knew exactly what would happen should their protective gear fail. "They've prepared for this," Dumont's voice was muffled through his respirator. This eruption was anticipated, predicted. Within minutes, the decontamination team had retreated behind blast shields. A siren began its mournful wail as thermite charges ignited in sequence. They immolated the entire chamber where it stood, a pyre of sanitation that sent pillars of tainted smoke curling toward the domed ceiling above. The purifying flames could not, however, cauterize the psychic wound inflicted upon my consciousness. Those terrible, horrendous words of prophecy, 20 of 20 Dark Mother and the Dark Harvest, repeated in my psyche like some accursed phonograph cylinder, etching themselves deeper with each iteration. The voice that carried them transformed with each repetition, modulating from recognizable human cadence into something I cannot begin to describe without risking what tenuous hold on reality I still maintain. The sounds emerged from no earthly larynx, resembling more the stridulations of cosmic insects, or the whispers that might escape from tears in the fabric of existence itself. In that moment of perfect clarity and perfect despair, I silently beseeched Dumont to draw his service weapon and deliver me from this knowledge with a merciful bullet. But looking into his haunted eyes, I recognized that he, too, walked the precarious boundary between sanity and something far worse than mere madness. He had glimpsed the abyss, and within it, the abyss had recognized him, just as it had recognized me. As the flames consumed the grotesque assembly below, casting writhing shadows that seemed to move with purposeful malevolence against the confines of physical law, a terrible suspicion birthed itself within the darkened corridors of my mind. A soldier approached us. His containment suit was pristine military issue, but my eyes were drawn to the peculiar adornments that festooned his gear. Religious symbols from a half-dozen faiths dangled from chains and cords, clicking against one another in discordant rhythm. He carried a square metallic box with a handle, its surface etched with eldritch symbols I could not comprehend. Without a word, he presented it to Dumont, who accepted it with the reverence one might accord a holy relic, or the caution one might show a primed explosive. Dumont did not open the container. Instead, his trembling fingers traced absent patterns upon its surface as he spoke in hushed tones. Inside is a specimen, a fragment of that which should not be, preserved in a glass containment jar with careful inscriptions etched upon its base. Ancient sigils, meticulously rendered by hands versed in blasphemous geometries beyond mortal understanding. "Tell me, Dumont," I whispered, my voice a brittle thing against the cacophony of purging flame. Was it truly contaminated bread that brought forth these abominations? Or did men in laboratories not unlike this one call forth that which lurks beyond the veil, only to lose control of powers they had no business commanding? For I perceive now that these containment protocols bear the unmistakable precision of foreknowledge, as if the very catastrophe we witness was but one movement in an orchestration whose terrible symphony has only begun to sound across the hideous vastness separating what is from what must never be. Dumont handed me the sealed case, his eyes revealing a complex alchemy of dread and resignation. As the weight of the box settled in my hands, I felt something within pulse with an unnatural rhythm against my palms through the metallic housing. "And Dumont," I continued, a terrible clarity dawning upon me, "why am I taking this monstrosity as a sample with me? Who exactly is waiting for this?"